Ladies and gentlemen, Cantrip.
Guys, this is fun.
Let's not beat around the bush.
We need people.
Traditional music is folk music.
Ding dong, motherfuckers, I'm here, let's go. Yeah.
This is See You Next Tuesday, and today we are welcoming a very special guest, friend, compatriot, and literal brother, Rohan McDonald.
Hello. Yes, hello. Is that what we're doing?
Well, technically, a brother from another mother.
Yeah, literally.
Same dad, different moms. But brothers just the same.
Brothers just the same. NFTs. Have you guys talked about these yet?
But amongst ourselves, yes. I mean, come on, a $750,000 GIF.
Yeah.
That shit's interesting.
Yeah, it's frustrating because in my industry, and this might be a good segue actually. So here we go. But in motion design and animation, NFTs became this whole thing where everyone was like, "Oh, I'll just sell my Instagram posts. I'll just sell whatever I've made as a non-fungible token." And then one motion designer in particular, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, Beeple, whatever that guy's name is, he made that buttload of cash, and so everyone hopped onto it, and no one in motion design really talked about the environmental impact or studied it or did any research. And so all of a sudden it's like hundreds of thousands of people doing that. And I remember I posted my thoughts because I was in a particularly argumentative mood. And I had a few people kind of like argue with me on it. And they said that blockchain technology is the train and NFTs are the passengers. And so the passengers are not responsible for the environmental impact of the train.
What does fungible mean?
I want to say, I think I should know this having brought this up, but I want to say that it's something that you can't basically copy and resell necessarily. It's more paper trail. You're giving it a pedigree and a paper trail, and then and then everyone can see who owns it. Kind of like I was saying, the gallery dealer or art seller model. It's like this piece is not necessarily. It just has a pedigree that everyone's into.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It was being compared a lot to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they run on like separate marketplaces, I guess. So Ethereum is like their marketplace. We had to do a video at where I work full time on this a while ago and had to study up on it, and it was so depressing. But blockchain and Ethereum are two different marketplaces, and Ethereum is coded in a different way. Anyway, I didn't mean for us to get this far into this. It's so antithetical to what we should be talking about. And but yeah, it's just like I feel like I'm just at this computer all day, and then I hear about this and I'm like, this sounds like such a bad idea, but I can't look away. It's like a car crash that I can't look away from.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah. Or like a stack of Beanie Babies being thrown around that I can't look away from, because that's kind of how it feels, like the Beanie Baby craze.
I just suggested running a car into a stack of Beanie Babies.
There you go. That's a very protected version of that.
That's actually what I'm going to do tomorrow now.
Make sure you add some accelerant to that pile of Beanie Babies.
Yeah, let's make it quick, you guys.
You could turn that video into an NFT right there.
Yeah, there you go, and then it's full circle. Yeah. And you've protested something. Yeah, exactly. Using the medium. Motherfuckers, we gotta funge these tokens real quick. Yeah, exactly. So I made this movie, or this kind of short, it's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds, this film called Rooms. And it was this artist book collection that I made with my roommates at the time in college, who now have a publishing collective called Shelf in Chicago. And so we made this using a risograph printer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with risograph at all. They're kind of junky, almost worse versions of a Xerox machine, combined with like a screen printing process. And they were printers that were used in churches in the 80s and things, and a lot of kind of you know, outsider art punk kind of aesthetics started using these printers to create zines and things really quickly and cheaply. And so this kind of had a resurgence in about, I want to say like 2014. And then Chicago was actually a big center of that, which is where I'm based. It's blown up. Everyone's doing risograph stuff. And so we were doing this in 2017, 16. And we made these books where we were interviewing people about their physical space and then illustrating them as their physical space. So kind of creating characters out of their descriptions and assigning color palettes that we felt, you know, were appropriate for what they were talking about. And then we printed and typeset the interviews in these books. So they were just kind of small little things that you could look at and, you know, just a short kind of investigation of someone's mental and physical space. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the thesis being that the two are inextricably linked, your mental and your physical space.
Nice.
Oh, I would say more than that. I'd say they're direct reflections of each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And one, when one is in chaos, the other one is also.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. So that we were kind of trying to articulate that in an illustrated way where we're literally just, you know, illustrating these people, like just stop the connection and or just show the connection literally. Mm-hmm. And so then I was thinking, you know, I was doing animation at the time and I was like, I really want to make this into a moving piece because this is really a space that I want to investigate more through drawing, through motion, and through what I'm comfortable in. And so I started making this and ideating, and then I, you know, got a job, and then I stopped caring about it for a bit, and then I, you know, did other stuff, and then it became kind of this thing that I was just kind of, oh, I'll do it, I'll get to it, it's my big thing, I'll do it, I swear. And then cut to 2.5 years later, and a pandemic hits us all, and I have this thing that I, you know, feel guilty about not working on, but at the same time has never become more relevant because everyone is stuck in their space. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I'm also, and I shift spaces because I move in with my girlfriend to her place because it's in the suburbs and not in the city, so we feel a little bit safer there. And I'm thrown into a space that is not mine, and that I'm basically causing chaos in because of my presence. And then we move in together into a space. And so we shift to all these spaces, and I'm exploring all this and seeing it all directly impact my brain. And then I'm like, you know what? I need to finish. I need to finish this.
Yeah.
So I just started drawing and making these just very improvisationally based on the books and looking at them and immersing myself in the person that I was interviewing. And after I'd edited all the sound down, I just had these shots to make. And then I went and started just committing to it fully and finished it and was really happy with it because it was kind of just a short but sweet investigation of this topic, and motion added so much context to it and thematic value.
Yeah.
And there's also, I worked with a new sound designer who created some custom music. We investigated the sonic world of each person, like what their space is supposed to sound like. Yeah, it just became like a really interesting thing to devote my time to, like you said, during this time where I'm thrown into the effects, you know?
Yeah.
I did send it to a few festivals, like small ones, but they're kind of, you know, they kind of don't, similar to music where the audience being there, you know, you want that impact, so you want that reaction when you're watching. Because I remember when I watched my graduating film at a few screenings, like there was a specific point where people would laugh, or there was a specific point where something was tracking with the audience, or you hear a lot of you know, like, yeah, like, oh yeah. And that's
your perspective of the project as well, right?
Yeah, and it changes. It makes me not see it as so precious too, because you know, with animation, you work on it for so long. You know, you work on it at a backbreakingly slow pace a lot of the time, and then you finish it, and it's just there, and you're kind of, you know, it's 4 minutes that took you a year, a month, any amount of time feels like not enough. Like too much time to have made this small thing.
Right.
So the audience reaction, the physical audience reaction was it's just so fun because you're just like, oh yeah, it's not mine anymore, you know?
Yeah, it sort of opens it up and becomes a lighthearted thing as opposed to this thing you've been slaving over and like all of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
And I kind of liken it to how when I was at one of your concerts or something, everyone's clapping or stomping their feet or something, and it's like the rhythm is infectious. It's kind of like that, where the pace that you have perfected for so long is now understood and absorbed.
Yeah. The other sort of back-breaking thing that we would do as musicians, especially as a touring band, and this is something that I feel like is kind of cool to talk about in a way, because some audience members have this idea about like the type of spontaneity that there is in live music. Because as musicians, what we do is we develop very carefully an entertaining show, right? There's variations within it, but they're all elements that we've practiced, that we've developed creatively, whether it was formally or informally. It takes the time, the creative energy, and the pace at which that happens. It requires group investment, individual investment, all these different things. Like even the banter and everything, this is all part of it. There are intros to songs that we get used to, exactly what you're saying, people laughing at a certain time, or people being like, oh yes, I feel that, or whatever it is, and you feel that energy from the audience, and it helps kind of like let that go. Some people are like, oh, do you guys do the same jokes every show? And sometimes we do, because it's part of it. It's part of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same as a play, right? The play is the same every single night. You do it 30 times and people come and experience it. But what it is it's this product that you've put together, and now you're letting it go, right? Yeah. So it's like, for us as a touring band, we're essentially putting on a play or putting on a movie. Same as your animation is exactly that, right?
Well, Eric, are you saying that we are like, we animated characters on stage?
We very well could be. I mean,
For bad special effects, you heard it here first.
we are a bit cartoony at times.
We're all actually CGI characters. None of this is real.
We don't exist. You're right.
Yeah.
Wow, I never realized animation was so manipulative.
Oh yeah, I'm a fucking puppet master.
Yeah.
I feel like the rehearsing part of it and the practice and you get to know your tendencies a bit doing that, and like the tendencies form the jokes that you spontaneously have, or the experiences, or the rolling with mistakes possibly that happen as well. And I think it's interesting because in animation that happens, but it happens at a way slower kind of timeline, because you can only do so much at once. And so you develop these tendencies. I've developed this tendency, like a lot of tendencies in animation. I try to make the intro and outro fun of some sort, because I'm so confused as to why people would even watch this in the first place. And it's something I've realized over the course of making things for, 5 years or so now in this way, that that's my tendency, is to kind of alleviate tension of the fact that you're watching a short film. It's kind of like banter in some way, where you're ingratiating an audience in some way. You're telling them it's going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're giving them confidence in you somewhat, which is kind of like when I'm at a Cantrip show, it's like, feel pretty confident we're going to have a fun time when we get some banter going, I have a question for you guys actually about tradition in that way, because when I'm animating by hand, I'm accessing a whole tradition of established rules, approaches, putting myself in a long line of media that is associated with hand-drawn animation. And so, but when you guys are playing, you're accessing a huge tradition, like an even larger tradition of music, of even nationality to some extent. Like how do you guys feel? Because it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's a lot of pressure, but at the same time, it's a lot to ask people to process in some ways when you're on stage. And so how does like your interaction with tradition change what you do in some way? I don't know if that's too loaded a question, but yeah.
It doesn't feel loaded. I think first of all, there are lots of different levels of tradition going on, because just from what you were saying there, the thing that struck me that's the most immediately comparable are the aspects of playing instruments.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, you have to stand on the shoulders of giants. You have to just take people's word for it.
Yeah.
Because it's far too much to work out for yourself.
Yeah, and you have to trust yourself too in that way as well.
sense of trust in oneself and one's connection to what one is doing. Sorry, I said the word one way too many times in there.
Once more.
I think if you have inherent actual trust in your own creative ability, you can fuck off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Or there's something really fucking off there. If you immediately trust what you're doing right away and you're not questioning yourself and you're not investigating anything, then that's pretty.
I think that's called narcissism.
The idea of tradition can feel daunting if you look at it that way, but it also can feel very welcoming.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, I think that part of Ro, when you were talking about you being part of a tradition, like the cool thing about traditional music is that we actually do have the history. It's there.
Yeah.
There's a security blanket of being able to represent, add to a stream that people have already started with, right? So it's like, if I come to the lads and I'm like, I have this tune, but I don't know what to do with it, but maybe John or Dan does, right? That's basically what you're doing with traditional music.
Well, and I think, there was an interesting point that came up when we were talking with Sophie a couple of weeks back where, she was saying, as a singer-songwriter, it's all, sort of pulling stuff out of herself, whereas we're kind of drawing on things that that go further back in time and come from perhaps further afield. And I guess I would liken it to the difference between, say, building a house out of individual bricks or arranging houses in a sort of village formation.
When you do make original music, there is also that the tradition provides that kind of the village kind of structure in that metaphor. When you guys make original music, though, this is something I struggle sometimes. If I have a cool idea that I want to pursue, I don't know if it's a struggle, but it's a conversation of like, what does this thing want to be? Like, does it want to be a song? Does it want to be performed? Does it want to just be recorded? Does it want to be a conversation? Does it want to be, a thought while I'm taking a shit? Like, what does it want to be? And I think that's an interesting question for you, in your context, because you have this traditional kind of array to pull from, if you will. So I don't know, how do you guys reconcile or have that conversation if Eric does bring a traditional tune and it doesn't want to be what you want it to be? How do you do that? How do you figure that out?
We yet to find out, I think.
Yeah.
Personally, it's a matter of context, because I play with a few different bands that play different styles of music. So where my starting point would depend on which band, first of all, I felt could do the idea more justice. And with Cantrip, obviously, as you say, working from Scottish, Irish, Scandinavian, we're working from national traditions points of view. So that would be a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Let's say ethnic traditions, because national starts to sound political.
Yeah, you guys are just a propaganda band at this point, right?
But yeah, so it's that's a point of departure. Kind of something you need to consider is just the fact that it's going to feel different to everybody. Everybody's answer to that question is going to be different, and many of them are going to be right. My tendency is just try and push that shit as far as I can, and kind of get it to the point where, oh no, I shouldn't have done that, and just pull it back a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping you'd say, because that's kind of what I do.
I think the medium, kind of like and also kind of like what you were saying about a person's space and their internal space and their external space. I think you can have an idea, and depending on the medium that you choose with which to express it, it will come out differently. I mean, what was coming to mind was the difference between, say, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and I was about to say Samuel Jackson, but Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's the same narrative, it's the same story, it's got the same characters, but how you cut it together, how you tell that story, what you emphasize, what you don't, is very much a function of the tools that you have within the medium that you're expressing it in.
That's a great point, because if we're talking Lord of the Rings too, I mean, a lot of stuff was rewritten, a lot of world building was taken out and things, because the book can be liberal with that kind of thing, whereas the movie needs to focus a little bit to take you on a followable, somewhat linear journey.
I think that that's an interesting observation also, in terms of like a lot of what we're talking about creatively between the two of us, between animation and between music. These are personal representations that we are trying to show people, and that's kind of what a movie is too, right? So that's more what Peter Jackson's was. It was more like his representation of the Lord of the Rings. Whereas a book, authors can be extremely directive in their creativity. Yet at the same time, there's something about a book, or a painting per se, maybe, Ro, we could say, that allows for imagination and that type of creativity, that like you can express yourself but leave more room for people to imagine, right?
Yeah.
Music can be that way sometimes, but not always. And I feel like when you make an album, that's not what you're actually going for as a musician. You want to make something, and you want to say something that people hear, right? Same with like a movie. You want to say something that people see and process right away. Yeah. It's more like you are expressing yourself to other people, whereas a book is more like a sort of an observation as a whole. And maybe that's a really subjective analogy.
Well, you know, when comparing, say, a book to an album, you know, certainly I found in the ones that, you know, I've done on my own, and that the ones that, you know, we've done as Cantrip, within the album, there is an arc of a sort of story. There's a progression of ideas as expressed by the individual scenes or the individual tracks or the individual chapters, each of which has its own kind of arc. And so there is, I think, whether we choose to do it consciously or not, I think all of these different media have their own arc of storytelling. And I think that's something that comes out of us naturally as Homo sapiens, that, you know, it's just something that we're inherently wired for. It's that kind of narrative.
It's always worth bearing in mind that just simply put, different things work in different contexts. Like Lord of the Rings came up. The movie trilogy of that works on its own terms, and it does things that the book couldn't have done. You can just do different things depending on what. And I mean, Dan, you're talking about the narrative of music. Yes, it's there. It's always there, and it always has to be there. But most people aren't going to get to know that piece of music well enough to see that or understand it, unless you really write it large and have liner notes that thick telling you the story of what this thing is.
Yeah, grab them by the throat and you fucking force it down.
Okay, this is one of the great things about traditional music. That's a great example of that, right? Because there's a paper trail.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, not everyone's going to be in it, but those who are, like, it's a lot easier for people to get into that, and that is like that is the backstory. That is the sort of the context there. That then you know, sure, there's your own narrative that maybe people hear or they don't, but the backstory of a traditional piece is that book. Right, so that's something that's cool about traditional music, I think.
We should all start keeping a small stash of rye flour in kind of a damp jar.
Not doing ergot again. Not after the last time, all the witches and the burning. No.
Wasn't the French Revolution precipitated by an outbreak of ergot in the rye crop?
Sounds like something that would make French people angry.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, you imagine 50,000 tripping French guys. Oh, Jesus, rattling fuck that would be.
I can't make my baguette no more. What the fuck is it? Yeah, exactly. I remember there was on Good Morning America one time, there was a acclaimed polyglot who could speak 27 languages, and they were like testing him on different languages, and he'd just speak it, and they were like, wow. And I was like, there's no one here to tell him if he's correct, to tell us if he's correct. And so I was like, I can just go on Good Morning America, like speak Farsi. I'll be like, oh, fuck you. Like, and they'll be like, whoa, whoa. And I remember thinking that, watching that in high school, being like, what the fuck is this segment? Like, did they think? I mean, it sounded right. We don't know. Like, he could have.
Yeah. To your average non-Farsi speaking, you know, jackass.
Yeah. Everyone in Indiana is like, oh, okay. It sounds pretty foreign to me.
Rob, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was a lot of fun. See you guys.
Take care, you
Cheers,
guys.
brother.
Bye.
See You Next Tuesday was filmed before exactly no one.
If there is a topic that you would like to hear discussed on See You Next Tuesday, please message us at the Cantrip Facebook page, and we'll try to get to the most interesting requests when we feel like it.
Wanker!
Wankers!
Wanker! Hey, fuck you, you fucking wanker.